So let me go ahead and both post a link to the agenda and also the reading selection from Internet Archive, and we can get started. So here's the agenda link. There are two sections there for under December 12th, one for attendance and anybody who's first joining us for the first time. If you all could add your names under those areas, that'd be great. Grab the link to the IA publication. And then just a little bit of housekeeping or a side note, we will be coming up with another topics poll for 2025. So please look out for an email about that. We normally put something up, in this little site called TriCiter, just to enable people to vote on the different topics that we gather. And I believe that site's still around. I checked on it a little while ago, so I think we'll probably use that again to add a poll for people to mention the topics or the subjects they're interested in discussing for 2025. We'll post that early in the new year in January. So please keep an eye out for that. And let's see. Thanks everyone for adding your name to the attendance list. And let's see. Clearly, I need more coffee for this morning. So if I'm a little slow, please let me know. All right. So Anna, it looks like it's the first time you're joining us. Would you mind doing a quick introduction for yourself?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Lucas. I'm with the Indiana Archives and Records Administration. So I'm with state government. And my role with the Indiana Archives is that I'm one of our electronic records archivists. Our agency consists of 2 electronic records archivists. We primarily work with born digital records, and we oversee the transfer and ingest of electronic government records into our digital repository. And it's something that our leadership in the past couple of years has definitely made a priority. We're perpetually kind of in the process of catching up in terms of our infrastructure for our digital repository. I would say at this point in time, we have a repository that is definitely needs a little more work in terms of active preservation, but we have a pretty solid, I would say, storage and backup environment. So we're kind of like putting together all the pieces to it. And when we saw the NDSA survey come out earlier this year, I can't actually pin down exactly when, went to the website, or it was the one that was kind of suggesting whether or not there should be membership fees with NDSA. And so I kind of realized, we're members and we should be participating in the various interest groups. So this is my first time attending. It's been something that I've been interested in joining. So very excited to kind of get a feel for what this interest group has to offer, and I hopefully look forward to participating more in 2025.
Great, that sounds wonderful. Thanks, Anna. And yeah, thanks for joining us for this meeting. We actually, it's also great to hear that there's more emphasis being put on, archival processes in the repository and digital preservation. So if you take a look at these notes, if you scroll back a little bit, there might be some interesting information there for you. Specifically, Scott gave a great presentation last time on the UW-Madison repository, and we have quite a few workflow diagrams and things there. But yeah, anytime, we also have a Slack channel you're probably aware of, so anytime you want to reach out and chat with folks, we can do that too. Yeah, this particular meeting, I'm happy to see as many folks as we have here because it's usually the end of the year and kind of a quiet meeting. And we also chose a a selection from the Internet Archive for a kind of a reading club approach that doesn't, directly have to do with infrastructure, although it certainly does mention Internet Archives, you know, different resources available for digital preservation otherwise here and there. So it is neat to see. And also, of course, they just went through a terrible incident in terms of having a denial of service attacks and other things that happened to them earlier. I know they're still in recovery mode in some ways, but it's also very timely for this report to come out from them because those essays do mention lots of interesting points of view with regard to different types of materials. So yeah, it was great to pick up a few of the essays and take a look at them. So why don't we go ahead and open up the floor, and if anyone would like to start by talking about any of the essays that they read or one of them that they found of particular interest, please go for it.
I'll start. So one of the essays that I read was about preserving TV news in the age of misinformation. And this one was particularly interesting to me because I spent about 9 days down in Western North Carolina. And between the misinformation that was on the news and misinformation that was on the ground and misinformation that's popping up in all the media feeds while people are trying to get facts on the ground, not only about people, but also about utilities and nonprofits that are trying to help in the recovery effort. It was quite a challenge. And what Claire Wardle talks a lot about in this is how much celebrities and people, politicians and stuff, how many more readers they have, how many more followers they have. And we really need to capture like all of this TV news footage because in the past it's been like, oh, well, TV capture. I know we did something with public TV down out of Roanoke and we spent a lot of time digitizing stuff and people said, oh, we shouldn't be prioritizing that content. But we've had a lot of people show interest in those, in what we've been able to archive. But I think in this day and time, it's even more important to capture, everything that is from politicians and from these celebrities and news channels so that we can do research and see patterns. That's what Claire's talking a lot about is, if you don't capture something and you don't have it in bulk, then you can't see the patterns and you can't more easily find the issues. I know at one point when I was in Western North Carolina, there was a social media celebrity that was trying to increase their following by putting out misinformation. And it was really detrimental to the people living in the area. So I thought that essay was really interesting. And I think it makes all of the people here that have been capturing TV news and archiving it, it gives them a little bit more support. Thanks.
Yeah, Scott?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've also been hearing stories about how not just TV news, but in journalism also, but a lot of times in TV news where stories or rumors or fabricated things will be picked up and reported as news. And it makes me wonder if we might unintentionally be doing a disservice to the future by keeping what's basically false information and basically storing a false historical record. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily digital preservationists' responsibility to make sure the historical record is accurate, but I do kind of wonder about the sort of unintended consequences of keeping things.
That's an interesting perspective. I think Claire's point was if you don't catch it and have it to compare, then you can't analyze it and you can't, put out information to combat. But I'd be interested if anyone else's take on that.
Yeah, it's it's interesting to think about in terms of like the determining the intent for a particular collection, and you know, further, I guess, it would have to do with collecting policies that are in the works and happening, and being modified according to what a particular organization wants to capture. Would that mean that they would have a particular, you know, interest in capturing misinformation for comparison purposes, or just ensuring that it is appropriately labeled, or it's like Scott, I agree that it's not our responsibility to be like deciphering the cultural record, right? But yeah, it's I, well, me personally, I think they're depending on how impactful certain misinformation is. I think it feels necessary to capture some of it, but yeah, that particular you know, capturing all that born digital information or even digitized information and preserving it and making sure it's useful for the future is a daunting task. So yeah.
I think if you look at it as a historical record, having leaders, and she names certain politicians and she names certain heads of powerful corporations, there's history there. And if we don't preserve it and it's whitewashed later or not talked about, you can see analogies to that in earlier times in history when history books were written and certain things that happened were just refuted or weren't even included. It's like, oh, that didn't happen,
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Any other comments before we move to another essay? Okay. All right. Would anybody else like to share some thoughts about what they read in the report?
I could speak up just to if I'm struck by a couple of things, not so much by the individual essays, but more by the kind of the introduction, something that the introductory material sort of takes for granted almost what the assumptions of corporate influence and control, for example. And it's interesting that assumption we just sort of buy into, but I don't know exactly where we as a profession, what our collected stand on this is. It's interesting to me that like the Internet Archive is really leading this discussion, but that leadership is not happening closer to home. I wonder about things like these corporate, how do our laws, a lot of things are being decided in courts. Our legal system is kind of set up to favor some of these corporate. Sometimes it favors individual courts have come up with different decisions. I suppose you're all aware of that I just been fairly quiet for some reason. But I understand that the Internet Archive has decided not to appeal the lawsuit they just lost, right? So I'm surprised that they haven't made more noise about it. I wonder if they're preparing another position. I've heard other accounts of it, but this is kind of huge, right? They've been taking arrows for years, and our own community has been pretty unsupport. I don't see our leaders being that supportive of the Internet Archive. I've heard a lot of criticism actually from within the library community about what the Internet Archive has been trying to do, pushing the boundaries, obviously pushing boundaries where there is no legal precedent on, the corporate, like controlled digital lending. There's so much that makes sense. What would have happened if they hadn't been so alone? They're technically not a library, but they want to stand with libraries. And Brewster Kahle calls himself a librarian. He doesn't have library training. But there are laws that protect libraries, and if he can align with them, he can get similar protections, or he's hoping to. So anyway, I think about there's this corporate narrative which we kind of accept, but we don't talk about that much. Our leaders don't talk about it. Our conferences often have a lot of narrative that is actually corporate controlled narrative. Like, look at open access. Open access has been sold to us for a long time. Look how expensive it is, and oh dear, and this is so hard. But there are all sorts of quiet examples of small publishers working in open access, or every library website that's put out with some thought and care, with editing and review. That's an act of open access publishing. But we don't acknowledge that a lot of open access publishing takes place already. So anyway, back to the essay. I don't want to get too far afield. I mean, there are assumptions that are made that I think it's really interesting that we kind of buy into, but it's quiet, and we're doing it at this sort of interest group level. And if you read, like, the Scholarly Kitchen, and the people, our leaders are not talking the way we're talking. And why is that? I'll pause there.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I've heard the same kind of criticism, from, of Internet Archive as well, just based on their kind of like boundary pushing that they've done in different ways. So, but it's important boundary pushing to be doing, right? So, uh, I I was also kind of surprised that they didn't choose to appeal that lawsuit, and I wonder if that has to do with either the recent, just, I can't imagine it has to do with the recent attack on them, but or any kind of bandwidth or anything like that. That's been going on for so long. It's like has its own energy. So
I figure that it's something to, it was a very decisive decision. It was reached quickly, no real dissent there, and the appeal would go to a very conservative Supreme Court. Maybe they thought, let's cut our losses, and they're going to have to pay a bunch of plaintiffs' attorney fees, and not sure what that means for the Internet Archive's future funding, but it's a very tough loss.
right, and they have to be concerned about their funding and their own. I mean, they have a lot of their own homegrown infrastructure, their own storage, their own, like everything that not everything, but I imagine like a lot of the services they provide, it's all based on their ability to continue forward, facing a lot of the expenses that they have and a lot of the efforts that they're involved with. So I just saw Nicole's note in the chat. Thanks, Nicole. So You're saying, I wonder if the Internet Archive was alone by choice. I felt this reading was void of historical reference regarding the fact preservation has been an issue from the first text. It's only been about 100 years that fire was not one of the main concerns in regards to the loss of collections. What they wrote about is nothing new, only the technology is new, and I wish they had reflected on the past more to put today's issues into context from a library history point of view. Yeah, it's an important point. Sure. But Scott, you're gonna say something?
Well, I was thinking, building off Nicole's point, and I like John's question, about what is it about Internet Archive that, did not garner sympathy from libraries, and it started me thinking, well, I don't really consider Internet Archive a library, and why is that? Why is it not a library? And I don't know if I have a good answer to that. But I think Nicole is getting to something there when she points out that there is a pretty rich and long tradition within the profession of discussing preservation, discussing access, discussing balancing rights and responsibilities with open access, and that Internet Archive has not really been a part of those discussions and hasn't really seemed to be interested in them. But I don't know if that's just parochialism on the part of libraries and librarians, or if there really is something important that they're missing out on, that we feel like, before you talk, you need to understand some more of the past.
All right, well, thanks everybody for your comments. Let's see, we're at about a little close to 10:30. So does anyone else have another essay they'd like to mention that they read? I can go ahead and mention one of the ones that I read. Actually, I chose two that were very different. The first one was actually the very first essay with regard to on the importance of remembering forgotten books by Brad Bigelow. And this one I found pretty, he had a very stark point to make, or a couple of them. One of them being that, with referring to the classics that the literary classics that we're familiar with, that have bubbled up over many, many years, what is the reason they are considered classics? Are they're, is there the assumption there that they are the examples of the best writing of the time period, of the era? And should we make that assumption? And if that's not an assumption we should be making, then what happened to all the other writers that were out there that failed to have their particular works, uh, you know, be appreciated by the general public at that time? And why didn't those also become valuable assets or books or literature that's being preserved? And so for example, uh, um, he's talking about a particular author, actually more than one author, that the only copies of the books that he was able to find by her, one of the books is called Trance by Appointment, but the only copies he was able to find were in the supporting British copyright, or the registry library supporting British copyright laws of the time. And he was outside of London. He was actually able to travel to London and go to their rare books collection, one of the libraries, and see the novel, and this was a novel that he couldn't find anywhere else. He'd already appreciated other novels by this author, and then he also mentions another one that was in a similar kind of situation where he no longer lived near London, and that particular physical copy of a novel was in London at the same library, and he couldn't visit there, but he did find it on the Internet Archive as a book that he was able to read. And he's just, he's making a point that what happens to authors essentially, where they may be forgotten, their books may be forgotten because they never bubbled up into the public's view, is also kind of like, if you flip that around, it also turns into a kind of a mean, he says, quote unquote, mean trick to the readers as well, because, we are no longer able to find any of their work because the preference has been given to a series of classics that were accepted or found or publicized or became popular. And these books were not in that same boat. So he's making a couple of good points there. And, honestly, right, there are definitely different books that are more difficult to find. I mean, I'm, probably like a lot of folks involved in a reading club, and there have been many times where we've been able to find one copy of something at a library where not everyone can get a hold of it, or it's an ebook, and there's no way to get a hold of that, for more than one person. So, just as a general example, but. Yeah, I thought the points he made were pretty interesting, and also a good reason to question whether or not we should, kind of push our own boundaries and look for different authors that we might not have been familiar with in the past, and what has happened to their works, and are they being preserved? So yeah, I thought it was a neat essay.
Hi. Eric, that also makes me think of just that whole idea of there being too much to preserve, so choices have to be made. And again, how are those choices going to be reflected upon later for the things that we didn't do that we maybe should have? Similarly to how these publishers and even the music industry too decides what is popular and what is a classic and what's going to stay in popular culture and what's going to just slip away. No,
Right,
no answer to it, but just it's just I think it's an unsolvable problem.
Right, and it's especially with the approach, like you said, we can't preserve everything, and it's I wonder if that's also the slant from the Internet Archive is they in my view, they have had the approach of, we're going to try to preserve as much as we possibly can, regardless of what it is, and maybe that's part of the break in the thought or similarities in thought between institutional libraries or libraries in general versus the Internet Archive. I don't know. But I for one am happy that they are trying to preserve as much as they're preserving, and they're also offering services that, like, I know that they have their Vault service that recently became available, and maybe it's been around for like a year or something now, but it was neat to see that. They're kind of like, at least at our institution, you see, there's always the consideration of what is the line item on the general ledger for digital preservation? Where's the CDL? How do we make sure we have enough money to continue our programs that way? It is somewhat baked. We're lucky that it's baked into our budget in some ways, but it's also that's a very uncommon thing. And as we have more content enter the preservation repository, it's something we constantly have to revisit. So, Internet Archive is also trying to figure that equation out at the same time. How can they tackle that? And that's an important equation to take a look at all the time. But yeah, Scott.
Yeah, just comment again here. One thing that I'm kind of struck is this idea that there needs to be one place or one entity or a big entity that vacuums up as much as possible. What I've been seeing, especially over the past 10 years, is a lot of smaller specialized archive, community archives, African American history archives, Native American archives, other archives with a special focus precisely, working on gathering a lot of these lesser known, ignored, or not easily findable resources that they have a special knowledge and passion about. So I'm wondering if, one possible model for preserving everything, because you never know what's going to be valuable, or, everything is potentially valuable, is more this kind of distributed system. That's one of the things I really like about the Power project, to give funds and training and whatnot, digital power, to smaller archives so that they can focus on doing things that are niche. And then we have a distributed, basically, digital preservation going on with people collecting things that are in their area of interest and they do have expertise on and do value.
It seems to me that the Internet Archive's approach is to, and what's worked kind of brilliantly for them, is to really innovate the technology to make collection a very, very cheap process. So even if they're getting the wrong stuff, they were criticized and they said, but look at all the junk you're getting. Yeah, but think about, what if 10% of what you're getting is really good, and 10% of a huge amount of information is a lot of good information. So there's junk in there, but the selection and decisions are so expensive. They figured out how to just hoover up everything, and do it cheaply. It's pretty amazing and quite interesting. And their motto, universal access to all knowledge. One of the huge benefits to this is it's all kind of in one place. So it includes the misinformation too, right? Into the chat, I just snuck something that, some of these larger issues that I was really surprised to hear, for example, in iPresent conference in 2023, Sybil Schaefer from the University of California, San Diego, gave a lightning talk, Preservation in the Era of Late Stage Capitalism. It's kind of like really grabbing the bull by the horns, how can we do our jobs in this environment, really, with the budgetary constraints we have? And a friend of mine wrote this blog post, it's the neoliberalism, stupid. It's just like, wait, it's the big, it's the elephant in the room sort of thing. We're not really talking about this, but maybe we need to be talking about it more, that subsidies that used to run libraries and support libraries and all sorts of public benefit organizations, not just libraries and archives, but public schools and transportation. Maybe we need to rethink some of these things, and we shouldn't be too shy about putting our needs in this context, because I think it's important to surface some of these discussions.
My biggest concern about the Internet Archive, especially when it went down, is there any inventory of what is unique to the Internet Archive? Like, do we have, I wish that they would do some sort of, I don't know, a metadata tagging or something to other libraries that have a copy, whether physical or digital. Because if they go down, I mean, that's just gone in a lot of cases.
Are you talking about their book collection, their web archiving collection, their sound?
The web archive is a tricky area, but even their book collection. So the one article about the gentleman that's trying to save these books that he there was one in the British Library and there was one in Internet Archive. It took him to figure that out. And I wish there was more broadly information about what they have and where else it lives. Just to identify what is only there and should they partner with another repository to have a copy. I mean, I think this idea of targeted areas of interest collecting is great too, but I think there needs to be some cross-pollination where there are at least two institutions that are collecting the same things so that we're not relying on a single institution or archive or whatever.
Yeah, Robin,
So,
that's a good point.
I was at the Clear holiday reception and was talking to Tom Kramer about a project called Pod, which is like a data lake. And along what Nicole's asking for, if we get the metadata from different institutions and we can do this in a distributed fashion, they're just talking about doing it with the ILSs. But we could think of it in a different model where you're getting metadata from multiple locations and then using AI for a good use, I think, because I'm really skeptical about how much bad could be done by AI. But analyzing how many different places have, a version of something. And, using our technology to actually figure this out and having a record of it so that, one place that has a lot of content, when it goes down, we're not left with a big hole in what's available.
Well, this concept of so interlibrary loan, longstanding, there's some sense of what what other libraries have that can be requested. I don't know how that inventory is compiled, but I do know that at some level the Internet Archive participates in interlibrary loan. That doesn't mean their entire catalog is available to everybody, but they have some at least a toe in the water there.
Okay, I think we have time for, thank you very much, everyone, for your comments. I think we have time for maybe one more essay, if anybody would like to bring one forward. Okay, I will. I'll take the quietness in the room as no. But I think this has been a great conversation. Rachel, do you? Oh, sorry. Let's see. Yeah, do we have anything else that we want to add? And
Just to add to finding books in libraries, I'm gonna put there's this thing called library extension you can add to your browser. So if you're looking at a book online, it'll tell you what library to go to find it.
oh, interesting. Okay.
Add on that kind of fits the conversation.
Eric, I can do one more if we have time.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I chose the one on preserving cookbooks by Katie Livingston. This kind of struck home with me. I was formerly head of special collections at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and we had the country's largest Mexican-American cookbook collection, about 2,600 items. And so the author really talks about something that really, strikes with me about food as way of introducing culture, family and traditions, but also talking about the, labor and domesticity involved with or associated with some of these cookbooks. And also talking about the changes that you have with a physical cookbook that, has been seen some time in the kitchen, got some oil stains, got some flour dust, versus what they see with new blogs that are, several thousand pages of advertising before you actually get to the new the recipe and things. So I thought it was a really well done article. I'll drop a link into our cookbook collection down at UT San Antonio. We did a blog starting in 2009 with cooking demonstrations with this, involving all sorts of library staff as well as a couple by the provost at the time to do these cooking. And we worked with a couple of student groups to have cooking demonstrations to look at the recipes as well as sharing some of their family stories and things. So I thought it was really well done. Not a whole lot involving digital collections, but certainly talking about preservation of the original and what that means as an object, as well as the stories behind it.
Very neat. Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that one as well. Yeah, if you have that link, that'd be great. Thanks. And I'll go ahead and make sure to add these links to the notes. Deb, do you have a
Yeah, I was
comment?
gonna chime in on the parts. I didn't read the whole report, but I did look at some of the essays also, and I looked at two that were both similar in nature about GIFs and Flash, and they did put those two, their file formats, but they did put them in the two different authors put them in a little bit of context around a culture that grew up. I was interested in skimming those because I was also like new to the internet in my 20s and working in the arts at that time. So there was a culture around certain tools that people had their hands on. But I thought similar to a few of the others I skimmed, it is authored by the Internet Archive, and I thought, they were talking about the importance, the value of the work that the Internet Archive has done. And I think there's value in, they have a Flash emulator, so you could look at sites that have those elements. And they had by defact captured a lot of this era of early GIF, but I wasn't sure, and this, I was hesitant to chime in because I didn't read the full report, but I wasn't sure exactly where they were going with, the fact that these are cultural moments and of some importance. I think we recognize that with a lot of different formats and containers for things that are created. It was a little bit more than just talking about file formats, which is one little widgety part of preservation that we can get, rightly so, invested in. Yeah, I'm just, sorry, I'm not saying anything real. I'm just saying that I was a little confused about like the positioning of those things in particular in the paper. I did read a few of the others. Anyway, I wasn't real with respect for the fact that they put together what I think is, along the lines of like a really important message, because I have been involved in like internet culture and arts, and it is a vanishing culture. It is disappearing. I see value in the fact that they are making this internet archive, this web archiving at scale and doing things like software emulation at scale, and getting there faster than a lot of library efforts can do. So, I see value in that. I just, in terms of the report, I wasn't sure what they were trying to convey. And so apologies because I didn't read the whole tome, and that's So it's a little shy to step in, but yeah, just trying to make sense of it.
I kind of got the sense, oh, I'm sorry, Robin. I was just gonna say really quickly, I just got the sense that kind of underhandedly, they're trying to garner support for what they do by shedding light on the larger issue. But again, I wish they had called upon libraries for more input, like other libraries.
Actually,
Right.
I'm glad you said that, Nicole. And Deb, I'm glad you talked about it because I also read like the last article, which was talking about gifts. And, I thought I was a little confused, like going in, like they're talking about a format and waxing nostalgic and talking about the past. And it is a vanishing culture. A lot of us, were there and knew about that. I thought in the end, it's like Nicole said, they were really advocating for saving the vanishing culture, finding efficient ways to capture these things and using that because it was important to them and they felt like it was important to a lot of other people in the community, something that they could recognize and something that would have kind of an emotional tie-in for people, but ultimately advocating for the services and using examples like GeoCities, which was shuttered in the late 2000s, as examples of why we need to do things or the culture is going to vanish.
I think I could echo some of what Deb is saying about, well, here's my take on it is, as I read it, I thought the important points that they were the ones I think made up front, and they could have been developed further. And some of the use cases, while they could connect to certain people, for me, they kind of diluted the main theme, which is this vanishing culture. We're not allowed to own anything anymore. So nobody is preserving it. If you count on the industry to preserve it, well, the film industry said they would preserve films, and they lost half of the films made before 1950. They said, trust us, and we shouldn't have. So that I think that could have been made a little more forcefully and a little in a shorter form. Something, again, that's my preference. I didn't connect as well to the individual essays.
And I would just give one other thought about, yes, I think they are doing a lot, that they are taking a lot of bold moves and doing a lot at scale, which I said before. There were some things within the essays that I appreciated. Just as a whole, it was hard to track what was going on in that part too. But there, they pointed to the change in our practices and our consumption and ownership of digital artifacts that is the era we're living through. I mean, this is an interesting paper to have in front of us. But there's so much, I guess I would just say, adding on as a librarian, there's so much that has been entirely important and useful that they've done. And yet we have conversations back home in our library about someone wants to digitize and preserve something. And I say, okay, well, there's a copy over here and somebody's contributed it to the Internet Archive, there's kind of collection development, like looking around, there's different things that have been done by other institutions. And, and for an example, if I raise something like that, the immediate next thing that smart people in the room say is, what's their commitment to it over time? This is not Portico, for example, or clocks, like, how do I know that this is going to be something that persists? And, and then there's more conversations, following that, and who contributed it and what kind of thing is it, and, whatever. But just to say that not knowing exactly ownership and whether this is having its moment in time as an organization and something that's too big to fail kind of thing is kind of what goes on when we're talking about this.
Yeah, similarly, I mean, when we talk about faculty and their journal publishing and the articles that they submit to journals, those journals don't have a commitment to preserve. So trying to encourage them to submit things to our IR as well is really hard, and trying to explain to them, well, you may have submitted this open access peer-reviewed article, but they're not committing to save it forever. You should be also putting it in Vassar Scholarship. And it's really hard for them to wrap their head around that, because it's a professional journal in their field. It's well respected. It has probably decades of information. Why would we not trust it? But I have the same questions about Internet Archive. I mean, I just think things should be in more than one place.
Right. It seems like they've been around for a while, but it's not the same as an academic institution or other institutions that have been around, government-based institutions as well, obviously. And right, where do they sit in that spectrum? And what kind of evidence can we kind of latch on to find out? I also wanted to go back to Robin's point about the kind of emotional attachment to some of these essays, because I think it's a great point. That definitely, with me, when I saw the Flash, why preserve Flash essay, that got to me, because I years ago was kind of like, that was very close to home, and I thought the emulation, I wasn't aware of how much emulation they're actually able to do. So it was great to find out about that as well. But I remember when Steve Jobs said, no, we will not support Flash on iPhones anymore. And that was that, essentially. So not quite, but yeah, definitely had an impact. So yeah, I think there are different emotions that are probably bubbling up for these essays for folks, and that's an interesting, important point too. Definitely roped me in. So we're getting close to the top of the hour. Yeah, I thank you very much, everyone, for chiming in and for reading. Robin, I don't know if there's anything else you want to chat about or cover before we kind of wrap up.
Just really encourage people to respond to the Tressiter post, because we only meet 4 times a year now, quarterly, although you can definitely also attend the other interest group meetings. And in part, that's why we went to the quarterly meeting format. But definitely respond, because this is your meeting and we want to have the topics and the speakers that you want to hear from.
One more thing I'd like to add is, just as we talk about commitments and preservation, we should ask our own organizations what their commitment is, and knowing that libraries routinely deaccession things. They do, physical books, they will. I found it very hard to get the University of California to actually come up with a statement in writing about making even a best effort. In case of loss, we'll make the best effort. And this is a preservation repository. And so that was a really interesting exercise. I realized that a lot of libraries cannot commit. They don't necessarily have the funding to commit. So when you really push folks for a statement, you may come up with some surprising answers. I'm done. I don't want to hold up the meeting. Ending.
Thanks, John. Thanks. Okay. All right. Well, let's see. We should probably go ahead and wrap up. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We will be getting in touch with the topics poll, and look forward to seeing you next year. And hope everyone has a great end of the year and New Year and holidays. Thanks again.
Bye.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Okay.